and thank you for joining us for another TTF Talks. It's my enormous pleasure today to introduce Marc Crothall, who's the Chief Executive of the Scottish Tourism Alliance, so that we can have a talk about what's happening to our friends in the UK and how things are looking and when we think those borders might actually open again. Marc, lovely to see you. I hope you're safe and well.
Margy, I am safe and well, and great to be back. It was wonderful getting all my Facebook memories popping up in this last couple of weeks, because when I was with you out in Sydney 2 years ago and climbing your wonderful bridge and doing all the other great stuff in the city. So great to see you, and it's Friday morning, 7 o'clock here, not quite wine o'clock, so we just crack on.
Yes, well, I think there's a question about that. Everybody tells me that wine o'clock keeps getting earlier and earlier every day, but never mind. So, look, down to the thing that I think both of us are most passionate about, and I think our members are seriously concerned about, you know, what's happening for you from a tourism perspective? What are the sort of impacts at your end? How is the aviation market going for you? Give me a bit of a snapshot of what's happening for you in Scotland, and possibly a bit more of a picture of the UK.
Yeah, well, we went into lockdown on the 20th of March, and obviously, you know, we are devolved in terms of tourism, but there's been very much a four nations approach to lockdown at the early stage. Quite bizarre for us. I was stood on a stage on the 4th of March in Glasgow, just launching Scotland's future tourism strategy with the First Minister through to 2030, and then bang, crashed, you know. So really, really, you know, dramatic, as it has been around the world. And we literally overnight saw, you know, so many businesses see the impact of that. You know, we're not a heavy international based country. 30% of our market is international, the rest is domestic. But, you know, anybody who was operating in that sector just saw a complete wipeout. So first and foremost, you know, the need was to establish a response group to get some form of immediate injection of cash into businesses and try and prop them up. We're 14,500 businesses in Scotland, and you know, again, various shapes and sizes, but so much of the revenue generation and the money that needs to come to support this is coming from London, from the Treasury. So very important to work across both governments, and for that relationship to be really, really tight. And only just before that, of course, we were having debates about Brexit, and there was a complete divide between the two countries of, you know, whether we should be in or out. So the relationships between the governments was quite fraught, but thankfully over recent weeks and months it's certainly got much more together. So we've seen a phased sort of shutdown, but over the last couple of weeks, on the 4th of July, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the English roadmap, which has set out an open date really for 4th of July, from the 4th of July for English tourism. But he also moved away from the main message around stay at home to stay alert. And you know, Scotland have stuck by its stay at home principles, except as of yesterday, actually, it's very timely, this interview, our First Minister announced the roadmap for Scotland. But from an aviation perspective, grounded. Everything at a standstill. One of my board directors is the chief executive of Edinburgh Airport. 15.5 million passengers last year. Forecast by the end of this year, 3.5 million. Next year, at a push, 6 million. And I think we're getting about 200 flights a week coming out of that airport, and nothing out of Glasgow. So desperate times, and it's now, how do we, you know, fight our way back to prop up and make sure that the industry can recover. But sadly, we're losing a lot of the stock and a lot of businesses already.
So you mentioned that it was, you know, a good relationship now, and a good working relationship with the British government, or sort of the government based in London. Are they providing financial support to the industry there? Are there wage subsidy schemes and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so the immediate was for the Chancellor. In fact, you know, the Chancellor had just come into post as well. So Boris had just been elected as the Prime Minister, and The initial chancellor was removed or stepped down literally 2 days before this all kicked off. So the deputy chancellor took up the mantle, great guy, and the package of support has actually been channeled through the Treasury. So Scotland gets consequentials from what announcements get made. The Scottish government were able to put some monies into the initial phase of grant fund, and it was mainly to support the smaller businesses with 10 and 25,000 pound grants, which they applied into through and managed through local authorities. And then subsequently, we really pushed hard for the furlough scheme. So we had a initial phase of furlough opened up for everybody, which has offered up to 80% of income, up to a maximum of £2,500. So that kicked in from the 1st of April, and it's been extended since through now, in fact, through to end of October, but it's over a phased approach. So through to the end of July, up to 80% of salary, and then we're waiting now on what that scheme will be like for the remainder. Will be tapered out. We've got about 8 million people on furlough in the UK at the moment, so the cost of the scheme is costing as much as it is to fund the National Health Service, but absolute lifeline for everyone. And there's been various other huge, support schemes have come through for self-employed, obviously allowing them to get an average of their earnings for up to 3 months of salary, which is just paid out. There have been separate grant schemes supporting charitable organisations. Some money gone into the aviation sector. Plus, again, every day it's different types of people. But from a tourism point of view, we've been right on the front foot here with our colleagues at UK Hospitality. So north and south of the border, our organisations have been joined at the hip and really, really pushed the button. And the good thing is that the government recognised from the outset our sector, without question, has been hit the hardest.
So I'm interested to, beyond the sort of today and what we've called survival and then hibernation, and now we're in restart over here because we're just starting to release a whole lot of restrictions, and as a consequence we're starting to look at the longer term reform prospects of this. What are the things that we could have as legacies out of this? What are the sorts of government provisions and legislation that have been driving us all nuts for years that we should have a go at doing something about? Are you in that headspace now and starting to look at what those longer term legacy issues might be?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said earlier, we just launched our future strategy through to 2030. It was very much, focused on that responsible, sustainable agenda, looking at the climate, the climate emergency and everything else. And we reprioritized our focus into 4 key areas of people, business, experience, and place. But one of the other things that we did, we said we wanted to identify what were the conditions for success, what was needing to change to be able to drive forward an ambition for Scotland to be the world leader in 21st century tourism. And a lot of that is still very relevant. So removing some of those barriers we thought would take a little longer, and they've now been removed for us. So we do see the opportunity. But a lot of it's around regulation. We were very conscious that, and from our perspective, doing a lot of lobbying around the rising costs of doing business and how it's squeezing margin. And actually, to be competitive, we needed to be, and sustainable. The industry needed a better footprint. Reduction in VAT. We've got the highest level of VAT in Europe at 20%. So that's one of the things we're really pushing for that can be brought back down significantly. The removal of air departure tax is another one to stimulate, economic growth. Friends in Ireland, not so far away, have done that very successfully. And then looking at other things around, planning regulations and costs and deposit return schemes. Tourist tax was very much on our agenda as well, and that has thankfully been taken off the table. So these are all now invitation of government, looking for radical changes, real sort of opportunities. If we were going to do something very different, what does the industry want? So the invitation is there from the government to bring those proposals forward, to start thinking big and out of the box. Yes, process underway, which is good.
So I think we're all kind of focused on the government mechanism at the moment and how we make that part of the puzzle work. But strangely enough, it's actually the citizens out there on the street that choose or don't choose to travel that are going to determine all of our futures. I'm just curious, what are you seeing both in Scotland and more widely in the UK? How worried are people about travelling again? Is there a level of confidence? What do you think we're going to see as the biggest change in the British travelling public?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think it's a big concern. You've got sentiment which has got to be measured. So, and we've got mixed views like everyone else, and you know, our age demographic over here is very elderly. So we've got that community who are probably the most wealthy in terms of being able to travel. Again, when you look at the transport issues, whether they come on coaches, that's off the radar now. So you've got to look at you know, self-drive. But I think most importantly, it's about the community sentiments, particularly in the rural parts, you know, where they just don't want volumes of people coming now, potentially bringing a virus. And Scotland has 700 islands, you know, and we've seen, you know, island communities saying, you know, don't come here. And you've got messages of visit Blackpool is now called don't visit Blackpool, the Cornish. So, you know, and it's how do we manage that sentiment very, very carefully and building those relationships with communities. We know Visit Britain have done some good research that does show that those who were choosing to travel abroad and have obviously, you know, recognized that's not going to happen for a while, where would their preferred choice to be for holidaying? And Scotland actually, thankfully, sits very high up the list. But again, you know, mass invasions into some of our wonderful landscapes is something we've got to be very careful about. So managing that volume, as well as being very sensitive to consumer behaviour, consumer asks, a lot of research being done around that to gauge what do they expect to see, and do we need to develop a kite mark, for example, that would give them that comfort and reassurance of properties being, you know, COVID free.
Mm. So it's an interesting thing. Of course, we have the opposite issue. We've got plenty of open spaces and, you know, take an awful lot of people for us to look crowded. I'm curious, though, what do you think sentiment might be in terms of travelling to somewhere like Australia in future? Do you think we're still on people's preferred travel list?
I absolutely. You know, Simon Calder, the travel correspondent, who you may know, has been doing a lot of this research and sort of snap polls on the actual Twitter, and it's interesting to see that, in fact, outbound tourism numbers or bookings are actually looking very strong next year already. I think people do want to get away. I think price will be a dictate for a lot of people. You know, clearly many have lost their jobs and they're having to recalibrate how they might spend their money, and there will be choice options. And the young folk will always want to travel. I've got 5 young ones, you know, and they want to get get to see the world. And so, but it will take time to come back. I think the economists over here, they're not seeing, you know, a 2022 Q3 Q4 recovery time is probably where we're realistically at. But you know, we want you guys to come here as well. I think, you know, where a destination is demonstrating, you know, best practice and safe and has got space and has still got so much to see and offer, then yeah, you know, people of course are going to travel. I always say when we had the oil crisis to the ministers that oil will run out one day, but people will always eat, drink and travel. So yeah, keep investing in tourism, prioritize your budgetary spend into our sector, and you'll be safe in your returns.
Can I say, on that extremely profound note, and one that we should all take up as the mantra of the tourism industry, thank you so much, Mark, for sharing some time with us, and please stay safe and well and stay in touch.
Likewise, you too, Margie, and we'll love to see you over here in the not too distant future.